Right, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you all here. I just want to make absolutely clear that some of you don't believe you're attending the philatelist meeting downstairs and aren't here by mistake, because it's such a marvelous turnout and it's a great tribute to our speaker that over the last 24 hours, so many people have no doubt changed diaries in order to be here to hear your remarks. As you all know, ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged today to have the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia. Our guest was, of course, Ambassador to the United States before being appointed in 2015 as the Foreign Minister. And we are very conscious of the hugely important role Saudi Arabia plays, not only in the Middle East itself, but in the wider region. Our guest today clearly is the sort of minister I very much approve of. He's insisted that everything he says is on the record for the rest of the meeting. I don't know if he'll live to regret that or not, but there we are. That is something which I think is very commendable. It's a good time, it's a particularly interesting time, I should say, to be hearing your views, sir, because Saudi Arabia is in the news quite a lot. Only today, as many of you will be aware, there was a verdict of the Court of Appeal in London criticizing our own government for the sale of arms to Saudi Arabia, believing that on a particular occasion the normal rules were not properly taken into account, and that is an important issue. There has been the report of the rapporteur at the United Nations about the Khashoggi affair and allegations that further evidence should be looked into in regard to the position of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and other matters. So very, very topical issues. And if you're willing to, sir, I suggest perhaps you might say a few words to just open our discussion, and then we'll turn to question and answer.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Sir Malcolm. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my first time, I believe, at your great institution. I look forward to our discussion. Where do I start when it comes to the Middle East? Do we start with Iran? Do we start with Yemen? Do we start with Sudan? Do we start with Libya? Do we start with Syria? Do we start with Afghanistan, Pakistan? Do we talk about terrorists? Do we talk about extremists? Do we talk about pirates?
Yes.
And the list goes on. And the list goes on and on. There are a lot of challenges that we are facing in our region, and that require us to redouble our efforts in order to try to calm the situation and try to focus on our own internal development. As you know, Saudi Arabia has embarked upon implementing a package of reforms in our Vision 2030 package, which seeks to diversify the economy from oil, attract foreign investment and domestic investment, empower youth, empower women, open up new areas for investments, tourism, entertainment, recreation, all of these issues. And the changes that Saudi Arabia has gone through over the past 3 years are really incredible. Whether it's women driving, whether it's desegregating of the public spaces, whether it's appointing women ambassadors, whether it's appointing women ministers, and this is just the beginning. We intend to move in that direction because that's the only way that we can build a better future for our people, and that's how we can get our people, especially our young, to be able to achieve their hopes and their dreams and their ambitions. And so we're moving in that direction. We're looking at our education system, we're looking at our legal system, we're looking at every facet of Saudi Arabia in order to see where improvement can be made. The challenge we have is the problems I just mentioned. We have Iran that's been on a rampage for 40 years, and now even more so. We have a war in Yemen that we need to, working very hard to try to bring it to an end. We have instability in the Sudan, where we're working with the governing council to try to move the country towards a new constitution, referendum, elections, and a more stable future. We have the challenge in Libya, where we're trying to work with all the different Libyan factions to persuade them that given the resources that Libya has and the small population, there is no reason why Libya couldn't enjoy one of the highest standards of living in the world. They just have to get on with the project of moving towards a new future. Iraq is a challenge, and we're working to improve our relations with Iraq and to reduce in the process Iran's influence in Iraq. Syria is complicated, and we're trying to see how we can move the political process ahead, working with the UN envoy to try to establish the Constitutional Council and then move towards a political transition in Syria. Of course, we have Pakistan, Afghanistan. We have Pakistan, India, and the list goes on. We have the G5 Sahel countries, where we have been the largest provider of financial assistance to the equipping of the G5 forces in order to take on Boko Haram and prevent the terrorists from moving from there into Central Africa, and at which point it becomes very, very difficult to dislodge them. So these are all the areas. And in every area that we're working on, we're working very closely with our allies in the US, in the UK, European countries, Arab countries. We're also working to ensure that there are adequate supplies in the energy market as a result of the tightening of the embargo against Iran. And we're trying to ensure that we also work closely within the G20 to make sure that the global financial system remains stable. So we have huge equities in around the globe, and we believe that we have to be engaged at all these levels in order to make sure that things proceed. We have our challenges, and today you probably saw three of them. The UN rapporteur's report on the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the decision of the court in the UK, and the tribal politics in the US Congress. And so what we do is we have to deal with these issues as they come. The UN rapporteur's report we reject. We don't believe she had a mandate. We believe she was biased from the very beginning. From day one, she condemned Saudi Arabia without even doing anything. We believe that the report has contradictions in it based on media reporting and based on anonymous sources. Some of what is in the report is factually incorrect. She claims that the trials are secret, which is not the case. The trials, we have invited representatives from the permanent 5 countries of the Security Council and Turkey, and representatives of Saudi NGOs to attend the trials, and they have attended every trial. The last one took place today and had representatives from all of these countries there. So how can it be a secret? We have said that what happened was a rogue operation that was not authorized, that the king ordered investigation, that the public prosecutor realized a murder had been committed, people were apprehended, the charges were filed, the trials are ongoing, and we are determined to punish the people who are responsible for the gruesome murder of Jamal Khashoggi. That's what countries do. We have reviewed the procedures of our intelligence service to ensure that something like this cannot happen again, and that's also what countries do. But let the trial play out, see the verdict, and then judge it. But don't judge it from the beginning and say, my mind is made up, don't confuse me with the facts. That's what we have. People say it couldn't have happened without the knowledge of senior Saudi officials. I say to them, ridiculous. Abu Ghraib happened without George Bush knowing it. Was it authorized? Of course not. Iran-Contra happened without Ronald Reagan knowing about it. And yet, what did the US do? Investigate, hold people accountable, and punish them. That's what we're doing in this case. So that's one case. The issue of the court ruling today, I believe, is a domestic British matter. It has to do with the licensing of weapons, the process of licensing of weapons. There was no wrongdoing found. And I believe that the British government will be able to amend or tweak its licensing procedures in order to comply with what the court is seeking, and then the new licenses can be issued. The court did not stop existing licenses, so that's fine, and this is your system. You decide what your procedures should be, and I have no doubt that the defense relationship between our two countries will continue because it's in the interest of both countries that we have that relationship. The issue in the Congress, for example, 22 resolutions of disapproval. And when you look at them, I believe my mathematics is off, but you should read them. 6 of them pertain to Saudi Arabia. 6 of them pertain, I believe, to the Emirates. There are actually resolutions calling for the cutoff of defensive equipment to, believe it or not, the UK, France, Italy, Spain, Israel, Jordan, Bahrain, Qatar, India, South Korea. That doesn't seem to me like it's a serious enterprise. I think it's more playing tribal politics and trying to score points between the administration and the Congress. We have to work through it. We have to reach out to members of Congress, explain to them the reality and explain to them that some things are too sensitive to be politicized. And so how can you, on the one hand, criticize the president for sending forces to the Gulf and then want to deny your allies in the Gulf the defensive equipment they need to protect themselves? Are you basically saying the president should triple the number of American forces in the Gulf because there's a gap and it needs to be filled? I don't understand the logic. I mean, from a national security perspective, there is no logic. When people say because of the Yemen war, okay, the Houthis started the war 9 months before we intervened. And we intervened at the invitation of the legitimate Yemeni government. We don't use child soldiers, the Houthis do. We don't launch ballistic missiles at towns and villages, the Houthis do. We don't steal humanitarian assistance and sell it to fund our war machine, the Houthis do. We don't lay siege on towns and villages and starve people, the Houthis do. And yet, who gets blamed? We get blamed. Are we supposed to let a critically important country like Yemen be dominated by Iran and a radical militia allied with Iran and Hezbollah? That's not an option. It's not an option for you in the UK. It's not an option for the US. And so rather than say, we'll have to cut off supply of weapons to Saudi Arabia, are you saying that you want Iran to take over Yemen? And then we'll have thousands of ballistic missiles in Yemen pointed at Saudi Arabia, the way Hezbollah points missiles at Israel? Is this what you want? Are you going to then send troops, your own troops, in order to protect our border? Not because of our brown eyes, but because a quarter of the world's oil supplies are there. And what happens in Saudi Arabia is critically important to the global economy. Mecca and Medina are there, 1.5 billion Muslims pray in the direction of Saudi Arabia 5 times a day. Huge soft power. Do you want that to be destabilized? Of course not. So again, I go back and say, people have looked at the Yemen issue with emotions rather than with logic. Could we have done a better job explaining ourselves from the beginning? You bet we could. We didn't, but we are where we are. But I think the debate has become so emotional that reason doesn't seem to exist. And when the World Food Programme says, I'm going to suspend distribution of food in Yemen because the Houthis are stealing it and not distributing it, where's the outrage in the media? I don't see it. We didn't stop this distribution of food in Yemen. We paid for it. It's this emotional part. So how do we deal with it? We deal with it. We explain ourselves. We engage our friends. We try to improve our domestic situation. We try to improve the conduct of our military operations. We try to learn from our mistakes. We try to investigate mistakes that were made. We publicize the results of those investigations, as we have, in order to be in compliance with international humanitarian law. That's what we do. Anyway, I don't want to keep talking because I think you have questions you probably want to ask me, but in the scope of the topics, we could be sitting here for a month and still not cover all of it.
Well, thank you very, very much indeed for these opening remarks, which are indeed extremely helpful. We have just under an hour for questions from around the table. I'm going to use my position just to ask you one question, if I may, and then we'll open it up. A few days ago, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince gave a very major, long interview to a Saudi newspaper, covering very, very many issues of importance. But what one couldn't help but notice was what was not